Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to this class on Christian education. And for the previous class, we have discussed about the general context of Christian education, and here's again a little. Let me do a little review on that. We have formal class, the school, K to 12, a Christian school, where the Christian education happens. Most people associate that the word Christian education with that particular context. But also there's a church, and this class will include more focus on that education, Christian education. So there's a church, and then formal schooling, the private school K to 12, and then we have a home, the family, where critical Christian education does happen. So again, school, the church, and home. And again, we have another context that is so-called the community, the village. Again, it takes the whole village to raise a child. So that is true. So there's a neighborhood, the friends, relatives who are involved in for better Christian education. So again, context, the school, the church, and your home, and then the whole community. That's one context that we have discussed. Another context is the culture, and the whole cultural elements. There are two cultures that are coexisting, paradoxical, but there's a good culture or godly culture and non-godly culture. So let me write this down so you can. So two cultures, godly and ungodly. That consists a context. And then more larger context for this. Oops. Yeah, for the culture, it also can be education is a part of the culture, religious culture, political, economical, and media, and those things are also associated with doing of Christian education, or even the understanding of Christian education. And then we have larger context. So last class we have discussed about this bigger context. And the point was the Christian education does happen within this context. And then as we look at each student, individual, those who are being educated, you have to see a person, the context of that person, and then the whole lifetime. So our Christian education is not limited to K to 12, but it should involve or widen to the whole lifetime. So we are talking about the lifetime process of learning. And to review, there are two major elements that would need in definition of education. So basically education, the concept, the easiest concept of education would be having learning and having teaching. So teach and learn are the core elements of an education. And the second topic that we are going to discuss for this class, for the Christian education for today, is education, the definition and concept. So we did some of this earlier in the first class, but we'll continue to be more in detail, be more specific about this definition. So in any academic effort, especially in this college, university level, first thing that we do when we approach a certain subject, the key importance is having to define the words and terms so we can communicate better and proper. So the proper communication is given when there is a proper and exact definition that we agree upon. We may use the same the word, but that does not guarantee the same definition. And see, any academic effort for the study in this level, it is always key to define every term that we use, so we have an agreement and we do understand the same thing when we speak of that term. And this being Christian education, we basically need to define two things. What is a Christian? And then what is an education? And going back to that very basic understanding of terminology, the education, it involves learning and teaching. So when there's learning or teaching or both, then education is in progress. And we can safely say that is an education. But we need to be more specific and academic about this, okay? All right, education. See, this is a big word that we need to try to define and understand. There's something called etymological definition or meaning of education. Etymology means where this word came from. What is the root of the word education? Though it is in English, it's not really English. What I mean is, it's not from the England. It originates from somewhere else. The education is not exactly an English word, though we use it in English today. So, we need to go back to the root of that word education, which we call etymology, and try to understand the meaning. So word origin, there are several versions of this. So let's try to look. Mid-15th century in Europe. Okay. So when we say Europe, it means before England, that's usually the Italia, and then Spain, France, and these are the major the countries where they use the Latin. The reason that Latin becomes the major academic or intellectual language of that region, the so-called Latin world, even today when we say Latino, it means Hispanic, Italian, but usually it means Hispanic descent. But the Latin in academic term, it includes Spanish, Portuguese, Italian. They are the so-called Latin or Latino language group. And Latin, the language of Latin is not Spanish, it's not either Italian, it's not either Portuguese. It's another language. It's very academic language. It's more written language than spoken language. The reason the Latin became a global language at the time, in early like a 12th century and on, is because the Roman Church, today's Catholic Church, but at the time, the Roman Church, they used the Latin as the official language. When the religion, the Catholic, the religion, the Christianity, since the Emperor Constantine, it became the official religion of Rome or Roman Empire. When the Roman Empire rules most of the Western hemisphere, not including North America, they didn't have that influence at the time then. But most of Europe and North Africa, and then Eastern Europe were occupied and colonized by Roman Empire. Because of that history, the Roman Church had the influence over all this Roman Empire. And it is natural for that Roman Empire to have the influence of a Latin language. Because at the time, when the Roman Empire was ruling Europe, there were only a handful of people who were able to read and write. And Latin became the official language. It's just like the Chinese characters became the common the writings among the Far Eastern cultures or countries. See, so you know that Mongolia, China, the Korea. I mean, the name was different at the time. And Japan, they are all within that Chinese letter culture. So same thing with the Latin. So Latin was one of the primary language for the written language for the intellectuals, and those, I mean, you are not considered intellectuals unless you're a Christian at the time. So it got kind of coincide. So that's the background of why the Latin is important in the English language. And knowing that, and going back to 15th century, educaten, it's Latin, comes from educatus of Latin. I'm not an expert in Latin, so please excuse me on that. But the meaning is to bring up children or to train. That's the main sense or the connotation of the language. So when we use this word connotation or semantic, it has to do with the linguistics, the study of language. When you do the study of language, these are the key words that you are going to learn. That I majored in English language, right, in my university. So the connotation means the meaning attached or hidden to a given word. That's connotation. Semantics the same, pretty much the same. So you're trying to find the semantics or connotation behind the given word. So this is how we do it. When we see the word education, the connotation and semantic is to bring up children or child, or to raise and train. That's kind of connotation for the word educaten or educatus, which would be the verb, I think. And the word education is derived from the Latin word educatio, a breeding, a bringing up, or a rearing. Rearing means, raising a child. So these are the meanings behind the word education. So we can simply say it's raising someone or bringing up. See, it is a little different from the connotation that we had in learning and teaching. So education involves learning and teaching. But the purpose of learning and teaching is, again, to bring them up, to grow them, to raise them, to rear them. So it makes sense, right? So when you see the word education, think of bringing child and raising them up and making them grow and to become more mature. So the maturity, to mature is again another key concept or connotation of the word education, or to educate. So just put that solid into your concept. the education has to do with the bringing up of a child, or training of someone, or the breeding is basically applied for the animals, not the human being. The breeding is, making animals reproduce and just raising those animals, chicken or pigs, and you say breeding for the animals. You don't use that word breeding for human being usually. Again, this is another, example or the presentation that I brought from an internet. Educare, to bring up or to nourish. Again, here's another word, nourish, to feed and to give food so they can be nourished. See, the meaning of sense is to provide the food or nourishment or the energy or the good elements. So nourish is another word that is associated with education. So bring up, to raise, to rear, to train, to nourish. And educere, to lead out or to draw out. So that is a very key the connotation or semantic that is associated with the education, the word. When you try to define or conceptualize an education, not only you feed them and you grow them, you just raise them, protect them, but you need to bring out or draw out what is inside, the potential, the ability, the capability should be brought out through the education. That educere is a very critical element in understanding Christian education. Not only just Christian education, in education in general, or any other religious education, whether you're Muslim or Catholic, or not Catholic, but whether you're Buddhist, any religious education, they need to bring out something that is inside, because we believe as Christians, God has given us certain capacity, ability, and personality that is inside. And it is our job as an educator or a teacher to help them to bring out that potential inside, to express themselves, not only to express who they are, but by drawing out and exercising that ability and potential, that they may become an addition or help or benefit to others. See, that is a very key to Christian education. And for me, that is a very key to understanding of blessing. In Christian understanding of blessing is different from the blessing in other religions. For me, the blessing, the primary understanding of blessing is to bring out all the full potential of who you are, whether it's your personality, whether it's your character, whether it's your trait, whether it's your talents or ability, to bring them out. So, as a result of bringing them out and you fully being yourself, you will influence others in good way. good way. So so-called good influence will be benefit the whole community, and then your presence will be blessing to others. See, that's very key to Christian education. So not only we're trying to just define it, but we're trying to understand the very semantics, the hidden meaning of education or true meaning of education. So when we talk about education, not only you teach, but you're gonna lead them so they can, or help them so they can bring out their inner potential, their full potential to 100%, or even more than that. Then another word would be educatum. Educatum is the act of training or teaching. That is common for us. So, see, these are some of the elements or the semantics of education that we learn from etymological approach. So we go to Latin word, the old origin, and find out these meanings. In Chinese, we write that the first word, I don't know in Chinese pronunciation, but in Korean it's pronounced kyo. Kyo means to teach. And then yu, the next word is yu, is to raise, to bring, to rear, to grow. So teaching and growing is education in our culture, whether it's Chinese, China or Korea or Japan or Vietnam, we use the same concept. So you teach and you help them to grow and mature. These are like the dictionary definition, and we find it from the English dictionary. And the Century Dictionary, this particular dictionary also deals with the etymological approach. So it gives a definition in from etymology and Latin, educere, of a child is usually with a reference to bodily nurture or support. So again, nourishment, as we've seen in the prior PowerPoint. Nourishment is to give the food so the child eats it and digests it and grows bodily. And the same concept is in the Bible. It says when Jesus was 12, at the end of the story where Jesus was lost in the temple and then found later, he was discussing this very highly the philosophical and religious concept with the best teachers of the day, and the parents were like frustrated that he was there, not concerned about the parents, that they are worried. And then at the end of that story, the narrative, it says Jesus was growing in status and wisdom. See, these are the very key elements where the biblical or Christian education is aimed. And in this definition, dictionary definition, it deals with the growing in status means he was growing in his height, also growing in body. So physical growth, and then internal, the personal growth, and the wisdom. These are two very elements that we are trying to do in education. So it's nourishment is a very key part of an education. While the educare refers more frequently to the mind. So we haven't looked at this. But it says on the definition on the last part there, it says, there is no authority for the common statement that the primary sense of education is to draw out or unfold the powers of the mind. So what it's basically saying is, in the definition, these will be the modern and the most critical elements in the definition of education, and these we don't find that. But the Century Dictionary says it says nurture, support, and then growing of mind, and drawing out or unfolding of the powers of the mind, or the potential. Another definition: education is the process of facilitating learning. So the learning is while the learning is the major component of the education, it defines the education as the means or the tools or environment or context that facilitates the learning. So by this definition, education is there to help someone to learn. See, it does provide opportunity, it provides a facility, it provides a material, it provides a personnel like the teachers. So with then this kind of definition or this way of the definition, education is the process to help someone to learn. Another definition is or the acquisition of knowledge, skills, value, and beliefs and habits. So it's a process again. It's the same process, but the process aims to acquire or gain or have or attain knowledge, skills, values, beliefs, and habits. When we talk about the religious education, usually we focus on that beliefs, but us, the Christian education is learning about the life. So it should involve all these things, not just the belief, but it goes beyond the belief, or belief should include all these things. So according to this definition, we kind of have a picture the education as a process. It's a process. So that education as a process is a key. Another definition of the education: the process of receiving or giving systematic instruction, especially at a school or university. So this this sense, as a formal education, what we call formal education would be this: a process of receiving or giving. The key word would be systematic. Systematic. So there is a system, and education usually or should happen within a system. This is a modern education, the definition of a modern education. Or uh, if I'm not sure if it's politically correct, but Western education. So Western education is systematic system. It involves a system called the school. So there's a organized system of teachers, administrators, and the financial providers. And these are the people who are involved as an organized system. And but Christian education does happen beyond the school and university, even though we may have a Christian school or Christian university, such as this one, as a Christian university, which is a system. There's a director, there are professors, and there are administrators who will help out the students and student advisors. These are the people who are organized as a system to provide a formal education. So that definition is for the formal education. Another definition by Oxford Dictionary. These are the two definition given by Oxford Dictionary. Is an enlightening experience. So enlightening or learning experience. It involves enlightening, changing from A to B, not knowing to knowing. So that's the term enlightening. So you can be enlightened in many different areas, not just knowledge, not just religion, but your life experience. You may become to know a man and woman as you're dating. So dating becomes a learning experience, it's an enlightening experience, and it's an education in that sense. So education can be anything and everything in your life that make you a better person, or more person, or a newer person, or a different person. So in our definition of the education in our discussion would be more to the latter definition than the first one. So we will not limit our definition to the formal education, but we'll extend our understanding to that enlightening experience, the learning experience, or that will result different person than a second ago. We know this is an education because this is a formal one, according to the first definition. But outside this classroom, and when this class is over, then you'll turn off the computer, and then the education does not end there. Your education continues until you die in every area of your life. Okay? So that's how we are going to define education. So Christian education, it involves every life experience. You as an educator, you as a teacher, you should mind that this Christian education is going to continue after the preaching, after that small group the Bible study, and or after that classroom that you're going to teach in your school, your Christian school. So, experience that we are going to talk about. So, to define an education, it does involve people. And we are going to discuss about these people, because to define education, you have to also define these people who are involved in education. First one, educator. See, this is a very general sense. So who are the educator? Educator is a person who provides instruction or education. So instruction is a little limited, but education as we define is providing that enlightening experience. If you do that, you are an educator. So it can be anyone in your life, even younger one, or even at a distance. Today we have pretty much opportunity for distant learning. In the old days, you can only learn from someone who you are in personal contact. So in-person learning was almost everything. And then we had the books, the written record. So that is another way of distance learning. But today we have many ways. The technology provides us with these enlightening experiences. So a movie can be one, a book, of course, or the news can be one. So those are so-called educational opportunities or learning opportunities. So a person who gives or provides instruction or education are commonly, or we will define as educator. And in educator, we have teacher, we have administrator, and we have ministers in the church. So these are some of the examples. I'll go into the further discussion of who educators are, but I'm trying to give you just a general concept. So to define an education, we need to understand who the educators are. See, here are some examples or more detailed examples of educators. Instructor. Instructor, not necessarily a teacher as we understand it in English language. Instructors can give short, brief instructions to you. Or instructors are someone who stands like myself here and give the instructions. Instructions are the direct guide to certain method or certain concepts or certain behavior. So instructors can instruct you to do something or to think something or to change something. And so that's a concept of instructor. So see, your mother may give you instructions every day. And your father may do that. And your siblings, your older brother, give instructions to you. So those are instructors. Sometimes you may like them, You may like the instructions, you may not like the other instructions. And you make a choice. So that's how you are being educated. That's a learning experience or enlightening experience. So enlightening, it does not mean that you obey every instruction that you're given. You do not accept, people do not do that. You don't take 100% of instructions that you're given. So you do make a choice. Whether you are aware of it or not, you're doing that perception and then decision. So that's the instructor. Professor usually refers to the teachers in a higher education, college, university, seminary, or academy. They call their teachers professor. So I'm one of them. And usually professors hold a higher degree than higher degrees like a master's or doctoral degrees. So those are professors. So professor is a master in a given profession or the given topic or given academic topics. The mentor, it has nothing to do with a degree. While the professor is usually they are required to hold a certain level of degree, instructors, mentors do not. Especially mentors, anyone can become a mentor, just like anyone can become an instructor. But it does not mean that anyone can become mentors, but what I mean is anyone who provides a helpful and then consistent advice or instructions or learning opportunity for his or her mentees or the students is a mentor. While the instructors or professors or teachers or tutors, some other educators are temporary, meaning they are teaching, doing education on a given time within the given frame. Mentors are usually a person who does consistent or constant or continuous education for a particular person. So the mentor has the semantics or the connotation for the mentor. The important is the consistency, the length of time, and then regularity of the mentoring. Usually, it should be more like a lifetime or long term, like 10 years or 5 years at least. So mentor, it requires a longer period of time to connect or interact with the student. Tutor is someone usually who's teaching a given particular subject as a kind of extra teaching. That's how the sense of tutor is used today. But tutor in the ancient time is just same as a teacher. But tutor usually comes to your home to teach you. That's kind of today's sense. But in the old connotation, old use of the English language tutor is a teacher who makes a visit to a student and who are teaching at a home environment or other than the formal school. So that's the term for tutor. And I use that word, put the word rabbi as a religious teacher. So there are not only rabbi, but there are pastors, and there's like a guru, and there's a imam. These are rabbi, imam are the religious teachers. The function of rabbi or the monk, they are there to give religious instructions that they experience in teachings, learnings to their disciples, the religious disciples. So, not only just rabbi, but king. Principal. These are like educators, but mainly these are like administrators. Principal, master. Those are the examples of administrators who are educators. Name for principal of a school, elementary school, master of a elementary school. That means they're the head of all the teachers. But usually these principal and master do not teach in the classroom. They're the head of teachers. So their job is to the control and to help out the other teachers so they can teach better for the students. And there are some other administrators in a school system, clerks, and then there's accountants in a school. Those are also considered as educators, even though they are not directly teaching the students. It is necessary for them to be there so they can they help so the teachers can teach the students. So these are administrators. A coach. Usually when the coach is used for the athletic, teachers. So other than the classroom teaching. When you're teaching in a classroom, you call them teachers. But the coach are in the field outside. The football coach or baseball coach, so swimming coach, they're usually used as teachers who are instructing in an athletic field. And the guide is another form of educator. Guide does not give full instructions as most of teachers do. Guide just give usually the suggestions or directions or guidelines to their students. And guiding is a very key important form of teaching today, especially when you're doing a Christian education. Your job is to guide, not to just pull them and force them or enforce them. In the past, many of these so-called religious instructions or Christian education is to brainstorm and brainwash them. So they are, just accepting the given knowledge without proper discernment. So that's not the teaching that we are trying to conceptualize. That's brainwashing. Brainwashing is a kind of education, but it is not good education. At least for me, no. And also another way that is not guidance is just giving the knowledge, providing the knowledge, just information. So a lot of this knowledge stuff is given to the students in the name of Christian education. And they are to memorize this. Memorize Bible verses, memorize the names of the biblical characters, memorize the 10 Commandments. So a lot of this memorizing. That's having the information, and you're stuffing yourself with this vast amount of knowledge, the information. That's not the education that we are trying to pursue. Even though it is a part of education, it's a one kind or mode or style of an education, but I do not think that's the best education. So guide is another word, help. You're assisting, you're helping, you're being there, walking with the students. So they are going to have the desire, they will develop their own desire, initiative to promote their own education. So learning by doing, learning by experiencing, learning by making mistakes. These are the role of a guide, providing guidance. You are not necessary to give them a lot of information or instructions. So see, this kind of teaching that I kind of not favor is because there is no interaction with the students. We miss that because of this pandemic. I'd rather have students here so I can guide them rather than giving this kind of one-directional information. And if I could, raise some questions in your mind or reactions in yourself and in among the students, even though we are doing this one-directional video kind of lecture, I rather have that. So guide is a very important form of or style of educator or name of educator. Then we have a preacher. You know what the preachers do? They do sermon, excuse me, sermon every Sunday on the pulpit, just like this one. And then you're to there, sit and listen to the preacher. So preaching is a very common and then oldest form of educating or teaching in a church. So preacher is one of well-known, probably most common educator in a church setting. And most of education in a church today local churches, modern churches, are done by preaching. Preaching is good when it is good, but preaching, not all the preachers are good preachers. So preaching is a form of communication. So educators, again, has to communicate. We'll talk about that communication later on, but communicating is a key element. Communicating, as we define it, is not just one directional preaching. So preachers is, usually today's preacher, or even in old days, is limited because they would not have that feedback on site or off site. So when you do the preaching on Sunday, that's it. When they did not even have the recording system, the technology, the preacher says it and it's gone, unless you make a really, really fast copy of what is being preached. So good preachers, they usually write a script and then they publish that preaching into a book in the old days. But when they did not have that audio recording, what preacher says is gone and forgotten. So that's kind of handicap on the preaching method or preacher as an educator. So it requires a certain feedback, and then we need to discuss that communication in later on. So teacher. He or she is a person who teaches, especially in a school. So in modern English language, a teacher means someone who teaches in a systematic institution, a school or university or college. They are called teacher. So it's a professional whose profession is teaching. So when we talk about a Christian teacher, it means that a teacher who teaches in a formal setting, a school. Or a teacher in a church, because a church is also a systematic institution. Usually Bible teacher, right? We say Bible teacher because we don't want to confuse it with a school teacher. So if you're a Bible teacher, just like a Jimmy Carter, even in his 90s, he's still teaching it in the Sunday school, right? So these are the teachers. Then we have someone who are being educated. So in a system, education, as you try to conceptualize this definition and the connotation and of the education, not only you just define the word, but you need to understand the elements of that education and those who are being educated. This is a key part. Usually there are more people who are being educated than educators. So one educator usually deals with many, more than one, right? So these are some of the terms that we use for those who are being educated. Excuse me. So student is one. And disciple, student is used in a school setting, formal. So teacher and student, that's usually the terms that we use in a school or in a church. And students usually sit and teacher in front of board, they teach. And there's a communication between student and teacher. So students, whether they are in a preschool or kindergarten, they are students. Okay? In a university, they are still students. So those are the terms. Disciple, that particular term is used for the disciples of Jesus Christ. When a Christian, a believer, is in a learning mode, and we are disciples. So that can be like another name for a Christian. So we are disciples of Jesus Christ. And in any given time, right? Whether you're young and old, whether you're a woman or a man, doesn't matter. Whether you're a Chinese or a Korean, it doesn't matter. The disciples are disciple. This is a common name for the believers who are being trained as to become a better believer. But in general sense, the word disciple can be applied to that informal system of learning. See, while the students are within the formal systematic learning, this informal system of learning, whether it's a group or whether it's a more than a small group, you become a disciple. And discipleship or disciple is usually associated with the learning of certain philosophy or religious learning. See? So, or some professional learning, you become a disciple. For example, you're trying to learn a skill to make a ceramic, the work with the clay, and you are called a disciple, right? So disciple is that kind of term. Pupil, it's another word for student, usually in England. That is not used, no longer used in America, but pupil is in England. Learner, scholar, intern. We use that word pretty often in modern days. Intern is a learner who are within the internship. Internship is, as we know, it is a trial. It's kind of a process of testing. But you're being tested, but at the same time you are in the learning mode. So from the side of those who are providing that internship, they are examining that particular person to see if that person is appropriate for the given job or position or situation. But from the intern's point of view, it's not only the test, it is learning experience itself. So that's very, kind of, different perspective on a student. So as another name, another kind of name for one who is being educated. And that's very particular situation to be an intern, right? And then to understand the term education, it is, necessary to understand this place of education where the education occur. First, home. The moment you're born, or even, as I told you in a previous class, you are being educated in mother's womb. So what mothers eat and what mothers do and what mothers feel is very important for the baby, because they start learning at the moment they were conceived. So there is that learning process of 10 months in mother's womb as an infant, as not born yet. Because he or she who is not born yet, but still they are a person, and the babies, those babies have conscience, they have soul, they have spirit, they do respond, they have knowledge. So they begin to learn the moment of their conception. So the home is the very critical place for Christian education. If they were not raised properly at home, they'll have trouble at school. They'll have trouble at church. See, there's a famous saying, the problem child is not usually problem child, but it is the problem parents who are responsible or who causes a problem child. That's not 100% correct or true, but most of the time, when you see a problem child, you may safely assume there might be a problem parent, problem mother, a problematic father. So the home is the most critical place, because this is where it begins, and when the moment it begins, it projects to a direction. See, you know this analogy. I'm not sure if I'm correct 100%, but it's like a 230,000 kilometers between Earth and Moon, and you're shooting a rocket to the moon. And you have to be exactly a right degree. If you just miss 1 degree here, you're going to be thousand miles off the target, because it's just very long distance to shoot. Same thing with the education. If you miss, if you're off like 1 degree at home, especially when it is Christian education, they're going to be so far when they are like a 10, 12 years old, when they are a teenager, and when they are in college, when they become an adult, when they become again mother and father. See, even if you try to send them to the church and the Christian schools for a better Christian education, probably it won't work if you're missing that 1 degree from target at home. So that's key. The school, college, and university, these are the formal systematic institutions with the degrees. So when you graduate high school, you have the degree, high school diploma, right? College, you have the bachelor's degree. University, you may have master's, and then graduate school, you may have PhD. So those are the institutions where the education happens. So these institutions are important. I'm not saying they are not important, but everything starts at your home. Then there's a monastery, church, or temples. So these are the religious institutions where, again, this education happens. First, Christian education, the church takes a very key part in educating their believers. Then there's something called academy and institution. These are if you're a Chinese or Korean or Japanese, you are familiar with this extracurricular activities after school. So in Korea or in China, the after school is not after school, it's an extra education, the formal education repeated. And you go to these institutions and place or academies for those extra intensified learning, because it is critical for Korea and Japan and China to enter a better university or better college. Unless you are in a so-called the top, the major university, then your life is going to be different. Usually it is, in most of the cases it is, in our culture, right? So that's why they aim at the better university, the best university, like a Beijing University or Seoul University or Tokyo University. These are the top schools in the country, right? And they need some extra work and the teaching even after school is done, because they want to make that the best grade, the top grade. Then we have something called learning centers, community centers, after schools, and those are like informal institutions that provide different kind of learning than the school curriculum. It could be your hobbies, It could be some health, health athletic things, or it could be dancing or singing, some arts. So these are called learning centers or community centers and after school. These are also the places where the is provided, and many join these, and this is part of so-called lifelong learning, right? And then seminars or workshops. These are the mandatory, I mean, very key, critical kind of educations provided by the companies. If you work in a certain field, you constantly need to upgrade your knowledge and skills by attending these seminars and the workshops. Same for the pastors. I mean, once you are graduated from seminaries, it's not a done deal. You need to continue to study because there's always that new knowledge and new trends and new kind of doctrines and the methods, strategies that are coming out every day. So, I mean, you may do a lot of self-learning by reading, and today you can just go on YouTube and just type the topics of interest, and then there are tons of these teaching materials that you can view. But there's always more needed. And you need to interact with the experts, so-called experts. And they provide the needed information and the knowledge and the skills and experiences. And we are to, I mean, as a someone who's working in a company, you are required to learn these things, right? So these seminars and workshops are usually the mandatory, and it's also a good place for education. So again, we are not limiting our discussion of Christian education to this formal institutions or churches. It goes beyond that, and many other places where we know that the Christian education can occur. Now, to understand and conceptualize the definition of education and Christian education, we need to understand the process as well. See, these will be elaborated and expanded in the later on in this class, but without having this idea about these process, you may not start right. So I'm trying to provide the basic framework or platform as we discussed this concept of education. So these are some of the processes that are involved in education. Learning process, it is teaching process, it's training process, there's something called graduation, but more, there's a transformation and growing and maturing, or maturity. Maturing rather than maturity. So this ing, transformation, without having ing at the end, transformation word itself, it has connotation semantic of process. So basically, to define education, we have to understand that education is not an event. It's not something that is still or can be segmented. It is a process. It's time-consuming process. So to understand the terminology and definition of education, it is necessary for us to approach it and understand it as a process. So you need to conceptualize when we say education, it is a process. It is a long time-consuming process. It's an ongoing thing rather than something that happens and forgotten. And it involves these. Learning is a process. It's not something that happens once and done. There's no done deal about learning. I told you it's going to continue until we breathe the last breath. Again, the teaching is the same thing. You can be a teacher without knowing that you're teaching, without you having that degree for teaching. You're still a teacher. And the teaching is also a process. It's not just a classroom thing. In probably 10 minutes, this lecture will end. This teaching ends there, but it doesn't mean that the teaching is really ended. It should continue. Even though the classroom may end, you're not. I continue to teach, right? The training also, it's not an event, it's a process. Graduation, you go to graduation ceremony for the college graduation, high school graduation. All of you have had your high school graduation, but you know that did not end your education. You're still in here in the university. That's 4-year process, least to have a certain qualification and accreditation. And then after college is done or university is done, someone wants to continue their study, and you're graduating. Graduating is a process, and it's not just having the degree. That does not mean that's the end. It's another beginning. So that's why graduation is called commencement, meaning the beginning, right? Commencement means beginning. So you are, as you are finishing one thing, and you are beginning another step in your life, learning process. The reason I use the bold letters on these 3 things. These are the 3 the major processes that we consider in doing of the education. So the transformation, growing, and maturity, these are the major process that we are perceiving and trying to execute as we do the Christian education. We as a Christian educator and you as a teacher is doing more than learning, training, more than teaching and training. It's not just giving the knowledge or giving the information. We are making them to transform. We are helping them to grow, and we are there to mature them. So to mature a person, so the maturity ought to be the most inclusive word for these things. So we are there to mature them as a Christian. The Christian education, the goal is to mature a person to become a better Christian, or more mature Christian, mature believer. So maturity is the key. Maturity not only in knowledge, but in everything else. So knowing this education as a process, you need to conceptualize education, not just the word definition, but we are trying to embrace the whole meaning, the three-dimensional meaning of the word education, the concept. So I think it's, the time's up here, and thank you for coming to this class, and I'll just challenge you to think about the education until the next week, and think of the term, the definition of education, and we'll continue this discussion next week. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.